My name is Nicole Carter. I'm 30 years old, and I restore damaged museum exhibits for a living in Seattle. 3 days before Thanksgiving, my father called and begged me to come home, saying this might be the last holiday our entire family could spend together. He mentioned my mother's health, spoke about regret, and reminded me that I had missed the previous two Thanksgivings. Against my better judgment, I canceled a paid assignment, spent nearly $900 on a last-minute ticket, and endured an 8-hour trip to Asheville, North Carolina, including a miserable connection in Atlanta. When the front door opened, nobody hugged me. My father pointed toward two children standing beside a pile of overnight bags and said, "You will babysit your brother's children. We are going on a family trip." My brother laughed and told them, "Don't wipe your snot on her, kids." Then everyone laughed as though humiliating me was the entertainment they had planned before leaving. Behind them, I saw matching suitcases, resort brochures, and a printed itinerary for a 4-night luxury stay. My name was not on it. I hadn't been invited home for Thanksgiving. I had been transported across the country to provide free childcare while they celebrated without me. What they didn't know was that I had already discovered where the money for their vacation came from. I slowly removed a sealed document from my carry-on and placed it on the entryway table. My brother stopped laughing. My father read the first line, went pale, and demanded that I tear it up. My mother began begging before I had even finished explaining what it meant. But that document was only the beginning. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. My family lived outside Asheville on a property called Carter Ridge, a converted apple farm that my parents had turned into a wedding venue. From the outside, it looked successful. White fencing, restored barns, a stone terrace, and photographs of smiling couples beneath strings of lights. What most relatives did not know was that I had helped save it 6 years earlier. After a storm damaged the main barn, my father could not qualify for the equipment loan needed to rebuild. My brother Evan had poor credit and no savings, so I contributed $42,000 and personally guaranteed part of a commercial lease. In return, I received a 30% ownership interest in the company. My father treated that agreement as temporary even though it was legally binding. Once the venue became profitable again, he introduced Evan as his future business partner and described me as the daughter who had helped with some paperwork. I lived 3,000 miles away, but my name remained attached to several financial obligations. For years, I received polished monthly summaries showing steady revenue and manageable expenses. I trusted the numbers because the venue had an accountant. My mother Diane handled payroll, and my father Robert insisted he would never endanger my credit. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, however, a leasing company emailed me about an overdue payment on refrigeration equipment. When I contacted the venue's accountant, she sounded nervous and said Robert had asked her to delay sending the latest statements. That was the first warning. The second came when I opened a shared business portal and found charges from a mountain resort in Tennessee, private transportation, spa reservations, and restaurant deposits. More than $18,000 had been charged to Carter Ridge as client development. The guests listed on the reservation were my parents, Evan, Evan's wife, and several relatives. My name appeared separately as on-site operations manager. According to the notes, I would remain at Carter Ridge during the holiday weekend to supervise the property and handle any emergency involving Evan's children. I had never agreed to that. I had not even known a trip existed. My father's emotional invitation suddenly made sense. They did not merely need a babysitter. They needed me physically present so they could tell the bank, the insurer, and the venue staff that an owner was supervising the business while they used company money for a vacation. Before boarding my flight, I contacted a commercial attorney in North Carolina. She reviewed my ownership agreement and the charges, then prepared a notice withdrawing my personal guarantee from future extensions, demanding an independent audit, and prohibiting the company from representing me as an on-site manager without written authorization. I did not plan to begin Thanksgiving with legal documents. Part of me still hoped there was an explanation. Perhaps the resort had been booked for a legitimate conference. Perhaps my name had been entered by mistake. Perhaps my father truly wanted me home. Those hopes disappeared the second he opened the door and assigned me to Evan's children. Their coats were already packed. The children had tablets, snacks, and 4 nights of clothing. Evan's wife was wearing travel clothes and holding a resort confirmation folder. Everyone had known except me. "You said Thanksgiving would be here," I told my father. Robert barely looked embarrassed. Plans changed. We found an opportunity for the adults to spend time together. I glanced at Mason, who was 8, and Lily, who was 5. Apparently, the children and I aren't included in the family. Evan shrugged. "You don't have kids, Nicole. You wouldn't understand how badly parents need a break." His wife avoided my eyes. My mother stepped closer and whispered that they had assumed I would not mind because I loved my niece and nephew. That was how manipulation worked in my family. They created an obligation, concealed it until resistance became inconvenient, and then called resistance cruelty. "Why didn't anyone ask me?" I said. Robert's expression hardened. "Because every discussion with you becomes a negotiation. Sometimes family members simply do what needs to be done." I looked at the resort itinerary again. The suite upgrades, spa appointments, and expensive dinners had nothing to do with necessity. "And the company is paying for this?" I asked. The room went quiet. Evan's smile vanished for half a second before he recovered. "It's a business retreat." "Which clients are attending?" He looked toward our father. Robert answered instead. "That is not your concern." I took the sealed notice from my bag. "It became my concern when you charged it to a business I partly own and listed me as the manager responsible for the property." For the first time since I arrived, nobody laughed. I placed the notice on the entryway table and read the title aloud. "Demand for financial review, revocation of unauthorized representation, and notice to commercial lenders." Robert grabbed for it, but I kept one hand over the pages. This was delivered electronically to the company attorney, the accountant, and the equipment lender 30 minutes before my plane landed. I said, "Taking this copy changes nothing." Evan's face reddened. "You contacted outsiders before talking to us?" "The accountant and lender are not outsiders. They are people whose money and professional licenses are connected to this business." Robert ordered the children into the den. When they hesitated, Evan's wife hurried them away and closed the door. My mother looked terrified, but Robert's anger seemed aimed only at me. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. "I know exactly what I've done. I have stopped you from using my name to mislead the insurer and lender while you spend company funds on a personal vacation." He insisted the retreat was partly for networking because 2 potential clients might be staying at the same resort. I asked for their names, scheduled meetings, or correspondence. He had none. Evan interrupted, saying the resort charge would be repaid after the busy spring wedding season. "With what money?" I asked. "The refrigeration lease is already overdue." My mother looked at Robert in shock. Apparently, she had not known about that payment. Robert told her not to get involved, which finally revealed how many separate lies he had been managing. He had told me the company was stable, told Diane that all vendors were current, and told Evan that the business could absorb the trip. Then he had told relatives that I had volunteered to stay behind. "Cancel the notice," Evan said. "We'll put the resort charges on another card." "That does not erase the false records or the fact that you used my name without permission." He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Do not punish my children because you're jealous that the rest of us have families." The accusation was so calculated that I almost admired its cruelty. He knew I had ended an engagement 2 years earlier and that motherhood was a sensitive subject. In the past, a remark like that would have silenced me. This time, it clarified everything. "Your children are not being punished," I said. "You are facing the consequences of making plans without arranging childcare." Robert pointed toward the den. "Those children have nowhere to go. They have two parents standing in this house." Evan shouted that he and his wife had spent months planning the trip. I reminded him that they had spent months planning to deceive me. My mother began pleading with me to stay for one night so they could salvage at least part of the reservation. She promised they would return early and talk honestly afterward. "You're asking me to protect the same scheme you claim we need to discuss," I said. "No. The trip is over." Robert slammed his palm against the table. "You do not decide whether my family takes a vacation. I decide whether you use my money, my credit, and my legal identity to finance it." He picked up my phone from beside my bag before I could stop him. "You will call the attorney and withdraw this." I held out my hand. "Give me my phone." He walked toward his office and said I could have it back after I became reasonable. That single action changed the confrontation. Until then, they could pretend this was a family disagreement. Now my father was physically taking my property to force compliance. I followed him and repeated, clearly enough for everyone to hear, "You are withholding my phone to pressure me into reversing a legal notice." My mother told him to return it. He ignored her and tried to close the office door, but I blocked it with my suitcase. Evan moved behind me and said I was acting insane. I reached into the front pocket of my carry-on and removed a second phone, the inexpensive backup device I used when traveling with museum shipments. Robert stared at it. "I restore artifacts worth more than this entire property," I said. "Did you really think I travel without a backup?" I called the county's non-emergency number and calmly explained that a family member had taken my phone and refused to return it during a financial dispute. Robert threw the phone onto the carpet before I finished the call. "There," he snapped. "Now stop performing." I picked it up, photographed the room, and sent the images to my attorney with a brief account of what had happened. Evan screamed that I was trying to destroy the family. "No," I said. "I'm refusing to be destroyed to keep the family comfortable." Then I made the statement that ended their vacation. "I will not babysit. I will not supervise Carter Ridge. I will not authorize these expenses. And unless every personal charge is repaid within 10 business days, I will petition the court for a full accounting and removal of the current managing officers." Robert's face went gray. Evan asked what removal meant. I looked directly at him. "It means neither you nor Dad may be allowed to control the company." My father tried another strategy. His anger disappeared, replaced by a wounded expression I had seen throughout childhood. He pressed one hand against his chest and said the stress was making him feel unwell. My mother rushed toward him, but I did not move. Robert had undergone a minor heart procedure 3 years earlier, and ever since then he invoked his health whenever anyone challenged him. I asked whether he needed an ambulance. He immediately said no. "Then sit down," I replied. "But this conversation is not ending because you touched your chest." Evan called me heartless. I asked him why he had allowed a supposedly fragile man to risk $18,000 of company money for a vacation. He had no answer. Robert lowered himself onto a chair and began talking about everything he had sacrificed to create Carter Ridge. He described working through winters, repairing roofs, and missing family events. Some of it was true. What he omitted was that my mother had worked without a salary for years, that I had invested my savings, and that seasonal employees had repeatedly waited for late paychecks while he and Evan purchased new vehicles. "This property was supposed to become your brother's legacy," Robert finally said. There it was, the sentence beneath every financial decision. Evan was the son who stayed nearby, gave him grandchildren, and looked good greeting wedding clients. I was useful when the roof needed financing but inconvenient when ownership required accountability. "You gave me 30% because you needed my money," I said. Now you want to pretend that percentage disappears because you prefer Evan. Robert said I had abandoned the family business by moving to Seattle. I reminded him that I had moved 4 years before the storm and still saved the venue when the bank rejected him. You did not buy a place in this family, he said. You made an investment. Exactly. And investors have rights. My mother sank onto the couch. She asked Robert whether he had really listed me as the holiday manager. He said it was administrative language and accused her of choosing sides. Diane looked at me and admitted that he had told her I had volunteered to watch the children. Evan's wife, Claire, returned from the den and quietly confessed that Evan had told her the same thing. She had even sent me a thank you message that morning, but it went to an old number. Evan turned on her and demanded that she stop talking. Claire's expression changed. Did you know Nicole hadn't agreed? She asked. He said they had discussed it as a family. A discussion without Nicole is not an agreement, Claire replied. The alliance around my father began cracking. Robert ordered everyone to calm down and announced that they were leaving within the hour. He said Nicole could decide whether she wanted to behave like family or spend Thanksgiving alone. His confidence rested on an old assumption that I feared exclusion more than exploitation. I opened the resort app on my phone and showed them the cancellation terms. Because the booking had been classified as a corporate retreat, cancellation required authorization from the company's registered managing members. My legal notice had triggered a temporary restriction on non-essential company expenditures. The remaining resort balance could no longer be charged to Carter Ridge. They needed to pay nearly $11,000 personally before check-in. Evan began calculating aloud, then asked his wife to use their home equity line. Claire stared at him. You told me the trip was already paid for. It was, he said, until Nicole interfered. I corrected him. It was charged, not paid. There is a difference. Claire demanded to know whether their house had been used to secure any business debt. Evan refused to answer. That silence did more damage than anything I could have said. She walked into the den, gathered the children's bags, and announced that she was taking them home. Evan followed, whispering furiously. Robert blamed me for turning Claire against him. I didn't create their financial secrets, I said. I stopped helping conceal them. My mother then asked the question nobody else had considered. What happens when the lender receives the notice? I explained that the lender would likely request updated statements, proof of insurance, and confirmation that equipment payments were current. If records were accurate, the business could continue after scrutiny. If not, the consequences could include accelerated payments, suspension of additional credit, or default remedies. Robert accused me of threatening employees and upcoming weddings. You created that risk when you stopped paying obligations and disguised vacations as company expenses. He stood again, suddenly furious, and said he would call a meeting to remove me as an owner. I reminded him that ownership could not be erased by a family vote and that my agreement required a supermajority for major changes. He and Evan together did not have enough voting power because my mother held 20%. Everyone looked at Diane. Robert had spent years treating her stake as ceremonial. Now it was the difference between control and accountability. Diane, he said, tell Nicole this has gone far enough. My mother slowly removed her apron and placed it on the table. I think it went too far before she arrived, she answered. Robert's expression became one of genuine panic. He had expected me to submit, Claire to remain silent, and Diane to obey. Within an hour, all three assumptions had failed. I carried my suitcase toward the door while Robert followed, demanding that I stay until the business issue was settled. I told him legal disputes were not settled by trapping the other owner in a house and assigning her child care. Evan stood in the driveway arguing with Claire, who was fastening Lily into the car. Mason watched through the window with the silent alertness children develop when adults lie badly. I hated that they had witnessed any of it, but leaving them with their parents was not abandonment. It was the normal responsibility their parents had tried to transfer to me. Before driving away, I crouched beside Mason's open door and told him none of this was his fault. Evan accused me of confusing the children, but Claire told him to stop. I checked into a small hotel downtown using points I had saved for a future vacation. The room was plain, and Thanksgiving dinner would probably come from a restaurant. Yet closing the door behind me felt more welcoming than entering my childhood home had. Within 30 minutes, the family group chat exploded. An aunt asked why I had canceled everyone's holiday. A cousin wrote that my father was devastated after spending thousands to bring me home. Someone posted that modern career women had forgotten the meaning of sacrifice. The story spreading through the family was simple. Robert had invited his lonely daughter home. She refused to help with the children, then spitefully destroyed a Thanksgiving trip. I did not respond emotionally. Instead, I uploaded one screenshot, the itinerary listing me as on-site manager, alongside a second image showing the corporate charges. I wrote, for accuracy, I was invited after these arrangements were made. I never agreed to provide childcare or manage the venue. Company funds and my name were used without permission. The matter is now with counsel. Then I muted the conversation. The responses changed almost immediately. Relatives who had been promised free rooms began asking who was responsible for repayment. One uncle who owned a construction company warned Robert in the chat that personal travel could not simply be called client development. My aunt deleted her comment about sacrifice. The trip collapsed by evening. Claire refused to borrow against their home. My mother would not use her retirement account. Robert's personal credit card declined when he attempted to cover the remaining balance. The resort canceled the reservation and retained the non-refundable deposit. Nearly $7,000 was lost immediately, and another portion remained disputed. That was only the first consequence. The next morning, the equipment lender froze Carter Ridge's available credit and requested 12 months of bank statements. The accountant resigned as the company's outside bookkeeper, explaining that she would cooperate with an independent review but would no longer accept Robert's instructions. A major wedding planner who had been considering an exclusive partnership postponed negotiations after hearing that the venue's management structure was under review. Robert called me 17 times. Evan sent messages ranging from insults to promises. At first he called me selfish. Then he said he had always defended me. An hour later, he offered to repay my share of the vacation costs in monthly installments if I withdrew the audit request. I did not answer. My mother left a voicemail saying she was sorry, but even her apology ended with a request. Could I at least tell the lender it was a misunderstanding? That was the moment I understood how deeply the pattern ran. They regretted the consequences before they understood the betrayal. I sent one response to all three adults. Future communication about Carter Ridge must include the company attorney. Personal communication will resume when nobody is asking me to hide, excuse, or reverse financial misconduct. Then I ordered Thanksgiving dinner from a small restaurant near the hotel. I ate alone, but I did not feel abandoned. For the first time, solitude was not something my family had imposed on me as punishment. It was a space I had chosen to protect myself. During the following weeks, the audit uncovered more than a vacation. Evan had been receiving irregular marketing advances, without invoices. Robert had used company funds for repairs on Evan's house and classified them as maintenance at Carter Ridge. Several deposits from weddings had been moved forward to cover older obligations, leaving the business dependent on future bookings to pay for past events. It was not yet a criminal case, according to the attorney, but it was a dangerous pattern that could collapse the venue and leave guarantors responsible. My $42,000 investment had not merely been taken for granted. It had been placed at risk to support the lifestyle of the two people laughing when I arrived. Once the audit began, Robert stopped pretending he wanted reconciliation. He called relatives individually and said I was attempting a hostile takeover. Evan posted a vague message online about people who abandon family, then return only when there is money to steal. He did not name me, but friends from high school recognized the situation and began contacting me. I refused to fight through social media. My attorney sent a preservation notice requiring company officers to retain financial records and communications. She also warned Evan that deleting documents or intimidating employees could create additional legal consequences. 3 days later, the venue's operations manager forwarded an email in which Evan instructed staff to describe the Tennessee trip as mandatory training. That email became part of the audit. His attempt to protect himself instead proved that he understood the charges needed a false explanation. Claire separated from him shortly afterward. She discovered that he had opened a credit account using their joint income and concealed nearly $26,000 in business-related and personal debt. She took the children to stay with her sister and filed for temporary financial protections. I felt no satisfaction watching their marriage fracture, especially because Mason and Lily were involved. Revenge, I realized, did not feel like a celebration when innocent people stood near the damage. Still, I refused to accept blame for exposing what Evan had chosen to hide. My mother traveled to Seattle without warning 6 weeks after Thanksgiving. She waited in the museum lobby until I finished work. I was angry that she ignored my request for space, but she looked exhausted and carried a folder rather than a suitcase. Inside were copies of business records, handwritten notes, and emails Robert had told her to destroy. She said she had spent years convincing herself that silence kept the family stable. In reality, her silence had allowed Robert to make increasingly reckless decisions. "Your father says you're tearing everything apart, she told me. "But I finally understand that it was already broken. You just turned on the lights." She had voted to suspend Robert and Evan from making non-essential expenditures until the review concluded. Because her 20% combined with mine created half the ownership, the company attorney recommended appointing a neutral temporary manager. Robert went crazy when he learned he could no longer sign checks alone. He accused Diane of betraying their marriage and threatened to sell the property without her. The attorney informed him that he lacked authority to do so. My mother began crying in the museum cafe, not because she wanted me to rescue her, but because she had finally seen what happened when Robert could no longer control the outcome. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," she said. "I'm asking whether you'll help me keep the employees and couples from paying for what we allowed." That request was different. It centered responsibility rather than appearances. I agreed to participate in a restructuring under 3 conditions. Robert and Evan would have no financial control during the audit. All personal expenses would be documented as debts owed to the company, and an outside professional would manage operations. I would not invest another dollar or personally guarantee new borrowing. Diane accepted immediately. Robert refused for 11 days. Then the lender issued a default notice, and 2 couples demanded refunds after hearing rumors about insolvency. Faced with losing the entire venue, he signed. Evan refused longer. He claimed the advances were compensation his father had promised. When no written agreement supported that claim, he was removed from payroll and barred from representing himself as an owner. He had spent years introducing himself as the future of Carter Ridge. Now he was not permitted to access its office without an appointment. By early spring, the cost of Robert and Evan's decisions had become measurable. The audit identified more than $93,000 in unsupported personal expenses and diverted funds over 4 years. Not all of it could be recovered. To stabilize Carter Ridge, my parents sold a lake cabin they had planned to use for retirement. Most of the proceeds went toward overdue vendors, tax corrections, and wedding deposits that should never have been spent. Robert lost his position as managing director and became a minority owner with no authority over daily finances. Evan was required to sign a repayment agreement. When he missed the first 2 installments, the company filed a civil claim against him. His new truck was repossessed. Claire continued with the separation, and several relatives who had once praised him stopped answering his calls after discovering he had borrowed money from them under false pretenses. None of those consequences came from me inventing punishment. They came from contracts, debts, and truths he had assumed would remain hidden. My father asked to meet me 5 months after Thanksgiving. We chose a conference room at Carter Ridge with the temporary manager nearby, not a nostalgic park where emotion could replace accountability. Robert looked older, but I no longer mistook exhaustion for innocence. He apologized for the fake invitation, the childcare scheme, the misuse of my name and taking my phone. For once, he did not add that he had been under pressure or only wanted the family together. Then he asked whether I could forgive him. Forgiveness is not reinstatement, I said. It does not return you to the position you had before. It does not erase debt, restore access, or require me to trust you. He nodded slowly. He had begun attending financial counseling with my mother and a separate program focused on controlling behavior. I told him I would consider rebuilding a personal relationship if he continued those efforts for himself, not as a performance designed to recover authority. He would not call me to solve emergencies he created. He would not discuss business outside scheduled meetings. He would not use illness, holidays, or my mother to pressure me. If he violated those boundaries, contact would stop again. That sounds like a contract, he said. Trust needs terms when promises have repeatedly failed. I replied. Evan arrived before I left, though he had not been invited. He looked at me with the same anger he had shown at Thanksgiving and demanded that I withdraw the civil claim because he was already losing his marriage. I told him the company, not I alone, had filed it. He accused me of enjoying his collapse. I don't enjoy what happened to Claire or the children, I said. But losing access to money that was never yours is not persecution. He shouted that I had destroyed his future. My mother, standing in the doorway, answered before I could. No, Evan. We protected you from consequences for so long that you confused protection with entitlement. It was the first time I had heard her confront him without softening the truth afterward. Evan walked out, slamming the door hard enough to shake the glass. Robert started to follow him, then stopped. That small decision mattered more than another apology. For the first time, he allowed his son to face anger without sending someone else to absorb it. Carter Ridge survived, but it changed. The neutral manager reduced events, rebuilt reserves, and introduced dual approval for major expenses. Diane began receiving a real salary for administrative work. Seasonal employees were paid on fixed schedules. I retained my ownership but remained in Seattle, where my life was no longer treated as an empty space available for family assignments. I visited the following Thanksgiving for 2 days and stayed in a hotel. There was no luxury trip, no secret itinerary, and no expectation that I would care for anyone's children. Claire brought Mason and Lily for dinner. Evan did not attend. Robert asked before hugging me. It might sound like a tiny gesture, but consent had been missing from our family in more ways than one. I forgave parts of what happened, but I did not forget the lesson. Family love cannot survive when sacrifice flows in only one direction. Boundaries are not revenge, although people who benefited from your lack of boundaries may describe them that way. Independence sometimes costs money, reputation, and relationships, but surrendering your dignity costs more. Forgiveness can be compassionate without becoming careless, and reconciliation should be measured through changed behavior rather than emotional speeches. When my father begged me to come home, he believed 8 hours of travel would make me too tired, guilty, and trapped to say no. Instead, that journey became the last time my family could summon me with a lie and assign me a role without my consent. Had you been standing in that doorway after an 8-hour flight, would you have stayed for the children, or would you have walked away and allowed the adults to face the consequences of their own plan?
Thank you for staying with the story until the very end. This video is completely fictional and was created only for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection. We hope it reminds you that when someone breaks your trust, you do not have to let the moment become the center of your life forever. You can learn from it, go through it, and future a future where your peace is protected more carefully than before.